What if lack of self-belief was also very transitory? What if
Yeah.
the idea that, oh, I can't do this, what if that was also something to be played with? People always talk about the importance of self-belief, but very few people tell you how to actually build this belief in yourself. In today's episode of the Data Driven Actualization Podcast, we talk about the art and science of building self-belief. You don't have to heal, but you get to heal. And as you get to do this healing, your life will be a lot more effective. And just remembering that your default was to believe in yourself to begin with, it will alleviate so much pressure on your shoulders. We discuss why it was your default to believe in yourself to begin with, and how that default was corrupted by programs from society, from your parents, and from your peers as you were growing up. We also make a connection between how a strong meditation practice can allow you to have a foundation for a healing practice, and a four-step process to simply let go of unwholesome states and build a deeper state of being and believing in yourself. As always, drop a like, share it with a friend, and if you have any suggestions, drop a comment below. Thank you for watching. Welcome to the Data Driven Actualization Podcast. This is Ege. I'm here with Mr. Namer. And today, Mr. Namer, what are we talking about? You have a very interesting subject at hand.
Yeah. And I'm going to phrase it in the form of a very popular meme that really has a special place in my heart. And the title is Everyone Says You Should Believe in Yourself, but
Right,
nobody says, How should you believe in yourself?
right,
And,
exactly.
really what this came down to is everywhere you look, people say you have to have self-belief. I think there's that phrase even saying it's not I'll see it when I believe it, it's I'll believe it and then I'll see it. And
Mm,
so there's all these great phrases, and clearly the importance of self-belief is very useful. Um, but as I was going through my journey, I was like, well, but how do we actually build this self-belief?
hmm
And that's what we're going to be talking about today. Because, when you and I chatted about it offline, you gave me a very interesting revelation around um, the idea of self belief being an introjection. And so it would be really cool to dive into that today.
Yeah, today we can talk about the art and science of building belief. And I think the the first thing that comes to mind with this topic is people think that the default is not having self-belief, and then there is something to build. Kind of like you start at zero self-belief, and then you slowly build up to like 20, 30, 40, 50 as you build more proof of you achieving things. Like, oh, I was able to run this Spartan race, or oh wow, I played some squash and made some good rankings, or I graduated from this cool college. And people think like, oh, those are the accomplishments that I can use to go, I've achieved all this, so I can have self-belief now. Now, what's very shaky about that paradigm is that's very transitory. Like you can just lose everything at a certain point. And sometimes, especially with the way the life works, sometimes you take a step back to take a step forward. So if your self-belief comes from external things, then what will happen is you may actually make a good decision for yourself, but feel like your self-belief is reduced. Like a great example is kind of like, if you look at your story or my story, we could have had like very high paying engineering jobs and worked at Google or Amazon or other big companies. And in the traditional world's eye, we'd be like, yeah, accomplished people. But instead, we decided to go this route and follow our own journey and our own passion. And at the beginning, there are parts of this that take some time to build, although the long-term payoff is a lot higher. So if we were like, oh, I'm going to put my self-belief on how much money I make, well, that's a very shaky foundation to have. And the paradigm shift that I recommend for people is the default is the fact that you have 100% self-belief. And actually, there's things that happen in our life that reduce that. And there's stories we take on from the outside world, whether it's parents, environment, marketing, content, that reduce that self-belief. And throughout that process, that belief gets shut down. It goes from an 100% to 90% and 80% and 60%. And then we try to make up for it through achievements. But that's a race we just cannot win. So throughout this episode, we can talk about how to actually get back in touch with the version of you who had that self-belief rather than seeing it as actively something we need to build piece by piece.
Yeah, and to tie this into the ego development model that you shared with me, you
Mm-hmm.
know, how would that, how would the idea that we actually have a lot, our default is 100% self-belief, and then we lose it along the way as experiences, kind of as we experience life.
Mm-hmm.
Where do you see that fitting into, progressing through the ego development stages?
Yeah, so there's looking at it from the ego development perspective, and then there's looking at it from the stages perspective. And stages is this model from Terry O'Fallon that's super sophisticated, and it goes through kind of the different evolutions of people's psyche throughout their life. And that's been one of the things that I've been studying along with the healing work from Kim for the past few months. But basically, when we're born as a baby, we're at 1.0, which is where everyone starts. And the way the stages model works is at 1.0, the child has a very concrete world. So you're able to perceive like concrete objects, but you don't really have thoughts, right? You're just a baby. You're maybe touching stuff, figuring out the world. And then it's very individual. They're just aware of their own self, and it's very receptive. So that means whatever's happening in the environment, we almost like take that in. So if in our environment, like someone's angry or someone's upset or someone's fighting, we don't really have the differentiation to go, oh, mom and dad are having an argument. It's like, oh, whoa, my world's getting so dangerous. What's going on? Oh my God, this is scary. That's how it feels like, right? So at the beginning, we just receive everything, whether that's love and acceptance and lots of care from our parents, or whether that's absolute chaos, or whether that's something in the middle. So it's very normal to go through this experience and receive some false beliefs that we hold on to. Because, even if I was a dad or you were a dad, we're not going to be perfect. So every now and then we might get frustrated, angry, or upset
Yeah.
and do something we didn't mean to do. And no parent, especially like imagining we didn't have the understanding we have now, 30, 40 years ago, no parent is going to be perfect at this. So most people take on those types of beliefs throughout their childhood because we're just in a receptive state. It's kind of like if you were having a conversation with someone and instead of having your own opinion, whatever they said, you could just like take it in and believe it. You couldn't be like, oh, let me investigate what they
Yeah.
said through my lens. That's how babies are kind of like at that stage. So as we receive those stories, even as we progress through life, there's those stories affect us. And then we can receive different stories at different levels of development. So, for example, when we go to a more collective stage and we prioritize making friends or connecting with people, then we can receive more information around, like, oh, when I give someone a gift, they give me a gift back. This is how the world works. So that's where we start receiving more rules, whereas earlier on, we receive more like sensorial experiences
Yeah.
on what happens. So at every level of our development, there's a part of us that's receiving information from the outside world. And then a lot of the time, that information gets distorted, right? So we may be bullied in school, and maybe like, you have a crush on a girl, you want to say something, and like you write her a note, and your friend's like, that's stupid. Like, what? This is not how you do this. And then you carry that forward and you turn that into the belief to go, wow, so if I express my love, that puts me in danger. And people take on that belief and live the rest of our life through that. So
Yeah.
this is how we're kind of conditioned, no matter how careful we are or how aware we are throughout our life to take on these beliefs, and we lose that natural sense of the gift that we have to give to the world.
Yeah. Yeah, I think, for me, that came up very much as when I was starting my journey. I was like, I really was like, I want to be able to believe that I can achieve this. But the moment one part of me would want to believe that, it was almost like there was a louder part that was just like, nope, not gonna happen.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and what was really interesting to me, um, was how much of a impact this had in the real world, where
Mm.
I think one time, and I've told you this story a few times before, that I almost, well, accidentally, in no way was it intentional, I almost stumbled upon a way to, I guess, see my beliefs about my beliefs and almost play with holding another belief. So this
Yeah.
was in the middle of a match, and I was like, what if I played with the belief of positivity and confidence?
Mm-hmm.
Um, and it was like, I think, the physical exertion of that match and just the level of, it was almost like a meditative state where
Mm-hmm.
I had a level of clarity that allowed me to transform, or what's it, transpo change my beliefs about my beliefs and almost adopt a more productive belief. And that made me win the match. And that's the first time it made me almost question, like, wow, okay, just because we have a belief doesn't mean we have to hold that belief and see contrary evidence from the external world. We can actually play these games, or not games, but these perspective switches, to look at the world through a different lens of belief. And, that's where I found Twim to be very, very powerful, was that Twim was almost like what quieted the voice that said it would never be able to be done. And then Twim was able to allow me to very calmly look at the world from different sets of beliefs. And it really impacted how I was able to navigate situations, as well as, just how life played out.
Mm-hmm. So how would you say TWIM has helped you do that? And for people who don't know what TWIM is, it's Tranquil Wisdom Insight Meditation. It's the meditation that we recommend to our clients inside our programs. Um, it's not something we came up with. If you want,
Yeah.
you can search TWIM on YouTube, and there's a lot of Dhamma talks. Um, there's a lot of guides on how to get the meditation started. But the reason it's so impactful, and I'm curious from your experience as well, is with TWIM compared to traditional meditation or like kind of achievement-oriented meditation apps like Calm or Headspace. It's very much about not just recognizing a thought, letting go, recognizing a thought, letting go, but it's about recognizing your attention's pulled away, going never mind. So you allow that to just dissipate, and then actually relaxing the tension and tightness in your head, smiling, and then coming back. So it adds a very subtle but strong gentleness to the process, which I think creates more space between a belief, no matter like how intense it feels in the moment, and the observer perspective we can take. And that makes it a lot easier to play around with those beliefs compared to just recognize, let it go, recognize, let it go, recognize, let it go. But how was it like from your experience?
Yeah, so it's funny in that I almost have kind of one experience of navigating adversity without TWIM, with just more of a, I'd been reading The Power of Now at that time. And so, it was a bit more just straight mindfulness versus doing it with TWIM. And what I know, and, in both cases, the idea was, okay, belief comes up, learn to be present, learn to be mindful. Um, and so the interesting thing, and this is just from my experience, was doing just more traditional mindfulness based approaches. When the belief came up, it was quite like debilitating, and the mindfulness helped you kind of let go of that. The difference with TWIM was, but with the regular mindfulness, the belief would still keep coming up.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so I remember like one time I was even cycling to Chipotle, and the belief came up quite violently.
Mm-hmm.
Um, versus with TWIM, there was a beautiful calmness to it, meaning the the belief, not only could I let go of the belief when it came up, but the belief just came up a lot. The limiting belief just came up a lot less.
Mm-hmm.
And because of the subsequent gentleness of TWIM, when it came time to almost um, belief switch, it was a lot easier because you were like, let me try and hold this other belief. And the when I was trying to hold a more productive belief, the limiting belief wouldn't come up, or would come up with a lot less violence, or would erupt a lot more gently. And then I could gently move it to the side again, versus with other approaches. And again, just my experience, it was more like the belief would really like tear through the walls, and then I'd really have to almost like take a solid like pause properly and really work through that. And so TWIM had this really amazing gentleness to it, but there was true power in that gentleness.
Yeah, definitely. You touched on something very important there, which is the foundation of like having the experience with TWIM makes it so much easier for you to recognize that the lack of self-belief was actually something that you took on over time. Because having a strong TWIM foundation, or, a lot of meditative processes allude to this as well. You start seeing the impermanent, unsatisfactory, and impersonal nature of thoughts. Because with TWIM, and again with many other practices, you start observing your thoughts, and now there is no sense of this is me, this is myself. And you actually go, oh, this is not me, this is not myself, and this is not mine. And when we realize that, like you can just almost like if you saw a scene in a movie pass by, right? You wouldn't go like, "Oh my God, this is my life." You'd still be touched by it a bit, but you go like, "Oh, this is what's happening in the movie." And we can do the same thing with our thoughts. And when we're able to do the same thing with our thoughts, then the idea of going, wait, so if I can watch all this stuff, like I can probably play with this and see what happens. That's when it's a lot easier to have that perspective versus if you identifying with the thought and the story itself, then it's a lot more difficult to go, oh, let me change the story because a part of you lives inside that story. And I think that's
Yeah.
with Twim, you're able to see that, but you're also able to see through the steps of relax and smile, actually the change in state and emotions. Because with a lot of the other practices, you let go of the thought cognitively, but usually the state is still the same. Like the feelings still
Yeah.
stay because there's nothing done around the feeling itself. Whereas when we relax and smile, it's a lot harder to feel the same level of intensity when you're frustrated or upset or maybe anxious. So we're actually using a cognitive modality to have an emotional effect in changing the state. And then over time, as we do that over and over again, we realize like whatever state um, we experience, it's very transitory. And that makes it a
Yeah.
lot easier to see. Like, what if lack of self-belief was also very transitory? What if
Yeah.
the idea that, oh, I can't do this, what if that was also something to be played with? And just like we all have favorite outfits that we wear, but apart from our P codes, we are not attached to the outfit. We we can change the outfit that we wear. And changing your thoughts and changing your beliefs can be as simple as that. But the difference is taking the time to build a foundational practice with TWIM and with the shadow work and actually dedicating time into it. Like so many people want the one hack and one process they could use. But the hack is meditate for an hour a day for a year, do your TWIM, and then you'll realize how good you become at catching certain storylines. And then suddenly your state is in your hands and you can change it
Yeah.
as you like.
So this is a bit of a tangent, but how
Oh,
do
I love tangent.
mantras, yes, and tangential action,
That's right.
um, how do mantras fit into, using mantras to access states? How do those work in relation to this?
Yeah, good question. So we don't give a lot of hacks, but I think the mantras is one of the closest things you can have to a hack. And the concept is very simple. We're not talking about anything religious or spiritual here. The way that we look at mantra is, a word or a phrase you can pick that kind of serves as an entry point into the function you want to run. Let's go. I love
Oh
this
yeah.
technology. That's right. Wow. Nothing like getting validated on your ideas by technology. Thank you, Master AI. So we look at it as an entry point to the function you want to go into, right? So we can have different mantras for different states we want to go into. A good example, and this used to come up a lot, and this is something I learned from my mentor, Pierre, actually. He's the initial person who taught me this, is let's say you are about to speak to someone new and you feel some self-doubt creeping in. Maybe you're thinking like, oh, what will they react with? I don't want to look creepy. What will they say? You can simply go in your mind, you are safe with me. I need nothing from you. And as you say that, you want to, if you can turn it into a more embodied experience, like the more senses we can engage, the more we'll actually feel it. Sometimes people, especially analytical guys, are like, you're safe with me. I need nothing from you. Okay, have conversation now. But it's about feeling the energy of the words you're saying and feeling
Yeah.
emotion or even visualizing you protecting this person. The more senses you can engage with the mantra, the more powerful it will be. So that will put you into a more relaxed and calm state, which then, when you have the conversation, even if you say the same thing, the responses and the feelings are going to be very different. You can do
Yeah,
that with a sense of love. You can look at someone and maybe you're in the middle of a bit of an argument or it's someone you disagree with. And in your mind, you can go, may you be at peace. May you be loved.
yeah,
And having these good wishes will put you into a state of warmth. And we
yeah,
can do this with whatever state we want to get into. Um, so feel free to experiment with different mantras around the states that you want to get into. This is not like a prescription. Whatever works for you, some words
yeah,
will resonate better from the state that you want in your experience. So we're kind of giving you the process behind it, but you choose how you want to use it. And as you're doing it again, don't expect everything to work the first time. Like we're sharing everything we have behind paid walls in this podcast anyway. There is no other secret. Just
yeah,
keep trying, ask for feedback, show up, and be patient.
yeah. So is it fair to say a mantra is or the logic behind it is almost like it's a multi-sensorial visualization that's
Mhm.
aimed to kind of make you experience the state that you want to embody yourself. And then because it's so rich, because you're doing it not just with a visual, you're doing it um, with your somatically, you're doing it emotionally, that it's almost like you're feeling that experience. And now that you're feeling it, you're taking it into that interaction with you.
Yeah, the power of the mantra will depend on the person's ability to engage different senses, right? So it's
Yeah.
kind of like one of those functions where you put the word into it, and then there's all these other parameters, but those parameters are optional. So if you don't put anything in the feeling or in the vision, it's still going to run, but it may not be
Yeah.
as customizable to your experience. So
Yeah.
the way your consciousness works is it's more like there's more like different ego states between you or inside your consciousness. And each ego state can have like thoughts and feelings and impulses. So by changing the thought, you're kind of like allowing that state to come to surface. And then by
Yeah.
feeling into it and really welcoming it in, you're able to embody that state more. And I think
Yeah.
that's, from my understanding so far, that's the overall idea.
Yeah.
But even like for the average person, if you just had that thought and actively focused on it, that would still shift your experience. So this is not something like, oh, I want to do it perfectly. What exactly do I do? If you did it like 10%, it will still be game
Yeah.
changing for your regular experience because no one plays with this stuff, or very few people.
Yeah. And it also what you described about, engaging more senses reminds me of like when I was getting ready for competitions and I'd be given like visualization experiences. It was always said it's called visualization, but the richer you can make it, the better it's going to be. Like, don't just imagine visually what's going to happen. Like, imagine the feeling, the sound, um, you know, how
Mhm.
much you're sweating and how much you're dying on the inside, and you're still managing to run for it.
Wow, it sounds
Um,
like a late Friday night for me.
yeah. With me regretting the card not doing my cardio.
That's right.
Um, but something that was, when you mentioned mantras, and taught me those the first time, it really tied into something that I thought was quite interesting was in between points on important matches.
Mhm.
I would always be repeating slowly in my head, like balanced, slow, on the ball. And, in the context, for those who know like squash, they'll know. But really every rally I'd be repeating it to myself, and it would really help me play better because it was almost like I could say that to myself, and then once the rally began, I no
Mm.
longer had to consciously think of it because we're playing at speeds where and there's so much input that you can't try and like play change your technique live in a match and expect to play your best. So that mantra, almost every rally repeating it, put me in the state to automatically do those things. And again, not perfectly, but to a point that it served me really well.
Yeah, that's a very powerful example of how well they can work. How have you seen these mantras affect other parts of your life in terms of, when you were in school, right, or when you were socializing with people? Do you have any other examples of that?
Yeah, I'd say um I liked the king one for a while, like,
Mm,
walk around imagining you're the king. I think back in the day that really um it transformed the way I took my space, and like it immediately makes you not slouch and actually like stand upright
yeah.
and walk properly. Um and then something that I really played with because this was something I felt like I needed to get better on was projecting more of that love because I was a bit more like robotic back in the day.
Uh,
Um, and, hopefully less robotic these days, but,
mhm,
really playing with that, you're safe with me, I want you to be happy, that really enabled me to give that warmth to people. And I think what was funny was this was when I think you were telling me to do that, and I was like, no, I'm going to try this other thing, which involves asking this other question. And I remember,
Wait,
I
what's the other
remember,
question?
what was it?
So,
Something
what's
of,
the craziest thing you've done?
yeah, it was something like, I know this about you, this about you. Tell me
Oh,
something
right,
I'd like.
right. Yeah.
Um, and I remember getting nothing, nowhere with that. And the very first time I tried the metal, it just was like, um, things started happening. And so it really was a game changer in social interactions because even when there were times when um, I felt doubt about, oh, like, how is this going to be perceived? I really was just like, okay, I want you to be safe. I don't need anything from you. I want, like, you're safe with me. And that made me be so much more warmer.
Hmm.
Um, and then I think the other one was holding the belief that there's people out there who are waiting to meet me. I
Hmm.
think this was later on. And when I had a more stronger foundation of TWIM, I was able to hold this belief. And it was so interesting because when I held that belief, I was able to go into social interactions and really they went very positively because it was
Hmm.
really like even people going, um, just being very receptive, being like um, very welcoming. And so being able to hold these beliefs really, and I think even around things like, and I even see it now, right? Where even where I am currently, my default is to expect people to be very friendly.
Yeah.
And so it's almost like sometimes when I'll talk to someone else, I'm like, wow, the way they describe their external life seems so different because for me it was like I didn't have a local number, so I couldn't receive any messages, and over here everyone uses like a one-time passcode technology to send a message to your phone to give you
Uh,
access to various things. And it was just like people were just like, look, I understand, please go ahead, right? And so really there's something so powerful about holding these beliefs that
Hmm.
almost, if you hold these positive beliefs, and there's, and I'm not saying take it to the absolute extreme and try and take it to we're not arguing for that, but it's just like where I am, when I was kind of talking to someone else who lives a similar life, just by holding a different set of beliefs, it's almost like life is working with me and flowing with me, versus for her it was almost like every day is a constant battle.
Hmm. Yeah, because the belief affects the perception of everything. And even when you perceive the same experience through a different belief, you just see more of that belief you originally had. So the funny thing about people who have a bit of resistance to playing with this is they'll be like, oh, but what I've experienced is true. Like
Yeah,
I've seen this, like this is just how it is. But that conclusion came through the lens of that belief.
yeah,
And if you shift the belief, you can actually look at the same thing and conclude something very differently,
yeah,
change your experience moving forward.
yeah. And it's so like this belief stuff is so interesting because so many times we'll give ourselves a very high bar to believe something is positive
Mm.
versus we'll give ourselves like a very low bar to believe
Yeah,
something is negative. Like if something happens once and it's negative, we're like, all right, this belief is solidified. But if
yeah,
something positive happens, we're like, oh, I need to see it like 100 times, 50 times before I'll even. And I'm sure there's some evolutionary arguments in there for what's a negativity bias, but it's quite interesting in that who chooses one or who chooses 50 to be enough. And even once you start playing around with that, I think life starts to get very interesting and colorful.
yeah, yeah, I agree. Like even this morning, I'm feeling a little bit almost like sad about leaving Poland. I mean, it's been a great place and there's been a lot of, I think just the energy of being here is very nice, of just existing. Like there is this really nice balance of nature and architecture, but city at the same time, which I really loved. And I was like, there's a part of me, again, a different part of consciousness that came up that was like, oh, maybe you could have made more of this experience. But then I was like, well, we completely restructured what we're doing. That's a big shift. We're running a different one-on-one program now. We're building the community. We're doing these podcasts. Like realistically, I have done a lot during my time here. And I think that's what you're alluding to is when different states come up, they have different beliefs. And through the lens of this belief, the same experience can look very different. And then we're kind of, from a twin perspective, whatever consciousness or ego state that we feed nutriment to, that eventually dominates, right? That's actually the power of 6 Rs and letting go of these distractions and relax and smile and come back is you're putting your attention to a more wholesome consciousness. And that becomes the one that keeps coming back rather than the one with doubt and frustration. So you could almost see like different hindrances as different ego states. And the less you pay attention to them, and I don't mean this in like, oh, let's suppress everything. I mean this as, hey, I'm glad you're here. I'm going to be busy for a while. You sit, but I'll come back to you later. Actually cultivating that wholesome attention, that's where we can shift our reality in a sense, very slowly, but very fast at the same time, which is why I think with what you said with these beliefs as well, yeah, we pick these metrics. And then what happens is we create stories around why we pick these metrics, which makes it
Yeah.
harder for us to actually let go of them. And if you're just
Uh,
starting this process, then be patient with actually changing that. Because if you spend 20, 30 years of your life believing this is the metric and this is the belief, then you start doing TWIM, then you start working with your beliefs. If after 2, 3 days you're going to go, well, this doesn't work, how realistic of an effort is this? Like, is that you spend
Yeah,
0.00001% of the time you spent building the belief to actually change it. And based on that, you're like, oh, this doesn't work. So
yeah,
patience is key with this stuff.
yeah. And I think also touching on this idea of metrics around our belief and stories we create, I was thinking about it. And, for me, I was like, if something happens 3 times, then I can know it's not luck, right? And
Mhm.
then I realized, okay, why is that? And then I was like, well, because I used from my days of solving like multivariate problems, it was like, well, one variable, there's no problem at all. Two variables you can do by hand, but three variables, that's when, if you can prove it for three variables, then you know you're on the right track, kind of.
Right.
Um, and so it's really, fascinating looking into where all of these beliefs came from.
Hmm.
Um, but another thing I'd like us to touch on is this idea of the limiting beliefs coming in as introjections. What is an introjection, and why do they why does it feel like they take root so deeply that it's almost like a part of ourselves?
Hmm. Yeah, so interjection, again, just from Kim Barta's work. I didn't come up with this. Like, credit where credit's due. He has a ton of podcasts as well, so highly recommend checking his stuff out. But an interjection is basically a belief we took from the outside world and kind of implanted in ourselves. The tricky part is we don't usually see that, especially
Yeah.
yesterday's podcast, whenever that's released. We talked we talked about the growing up in different stages, right? The higher perspective we can take, the easier it becomes to play around with this stuff. But at the beginning, like look at someone in a very traditional culture, right? Whatever the church or the religion says, that's the truth. They don't see it as like, I look at the church, I take on this belief, I implement it in myself. They go, this is what the book says, must be true. And
Yeah.
in some way, that's super useful because it's good to have some order and some community and actual care for other human beings. And those rules build that
it
foundation in some way.
yeah,
So it's
it
not
reminds me of
bad.
that meme. Sorry, go ahead.
Which one?
um if not if not friend, why friend shaped? So it's like it shows these really like, cute looking lions and bears, and you're like, well, it's probably good to have a rule of don't pet the bear or
Yeah,
don't pet the lion, and
yeah,
best to not let people learn or play around with that rule too much.
yeah, I agree. Once we reach 10K subscribers, Dr. Numer is going to share his meme collection. That's going to be our to you.
The meme vault.
The meme vault will be released as a free gift to all of you. Imagine after this, everyone's like, click subscribe.
Yeah.
And we're like, guys, so what was your biggest takeaway from this podcast? Oh, the meme vault, man. I'm looking forward to that. Yeah. So to go back to this, if you're watching this and you just have the awareness that your beliefs could be coming from other places, that's like ahead of 95% of people. Like, in fact, I was talking about this a few days ago with someone over some tea. Um, then, this person is from here, so they had a very traditional belief system. And they're like, well, what if the belief is just it's just such a big part of you that you don't know how life even looks like without that belief. And it can feel like that for a lot of people to question those beliefs, which is what I think makes it partially scary. Is you think if I lose this, I lose a part of myself. But if you have a meditation practice, you start kind of taking some distance from it. You realize you're not your beliefs, and that becomes easier to let go. So the waking up practice connects to the cleaning up practice very nicely. Now, with these unproductive beliefs being things that we took on from the outside world, the easiest thing to recognize is for most people, when we see a baby, our first impulse is to give this baby love or think the baby's cute or adorable and just take care of this baby, right? Very few people go like, this baby is terrible or I hate babies, which again is an interject in itself. They may have had a negative experience that they then turn into a trigger. So that
Someone was on a
shows,
long flight
yeah,
with a
yeah,
crying baby.
those ones are rough, man. Those ones are rough. We need a tier list of beliefs to let go of. Crying baby at the top. Add that to the content list. But the the thing with that is it shows us like our impulse is to love and to be loved. Like our default is to give love and to receive love. And that comes with other beings and that comes with even the experience itself. So in a way, the fact that we can receive everything around us is a gift. And that's what we can come back in touch with when we see a baby, is to realize life is a gift. And if something is a gift, then it's beautiful and amazing. And then all these beliefs kind of come into our reality. And then as we live with these beliefs, what happens is now marketing is very sophisticated, right? So a lot of marketing, depending on how much integrity the marketer has or the company has, targets these beliefs that weren't even ours to begin with. So,
Yeah.
you might like, you might see an advertisement for like Axe is a great example,
Oh
actually.
yeah, I wasn't sure if Axe was like everywhere and if they ran their ads as globally as they did here.
Yeah,
Um
Axe is a big one where, you spray some Axe, all the girls come in, and you associate, oh yeah, when I do the Axe routine, the girls will come. And that
Next
goes
thing you
for a
know,
lot.
you're like dumping 2 cans on yourself.
That's right. I didn't know you had that video of me from when I was 7 doing that. Oh no. I need to check our Google Drive to make sure all the footage for our content is from the appropriate time frame. Um, so they kind of target these beliefs, right? And that's where doing this healing work is actually very tangible, because how much more effectively would you spend your money if you didn't actually get targeted by that and buy stuff according to it, and you actually bought things that you wanted for the life you wanted to create, for the people that you cared about, for things that were
Yeah.
important to you. And that's where letting go of all these beliefs we took on from the outside world is super powerful. And it will be a process. Like, I've spent lots of money on myself and done lots of coaching and show that massively in those coaching containers. And there's still work to be done. The difference is some people say that to push themselves, like, oh, there's always work to be done, just keep going. But when I say it, I don't mean it as like you're not good enough as who you are today. What I'm saying is you're absolutely good enough. You're an amazing human being. You have a gift to give to the world, and you can still have more things to take care of and more things to heal. So this is a journey with a destination towards the end, which is living a peaceful, aligned life. But then once you get to the destination, every now and then you might look back at the journey and go, ah, I kind of want to play with this. I want to play with this. I want to play with this. So you don't have to heal. but you get to heal. And as you get to do this healing, your life will be a lot more effective. And just remembering that your default was to believe in yourself to begin with, it will alleviate so much pressure on your shoulders, and it will give you a more stable sense of peace, because whatever you have can just be taken out tomorrow. And I'm not saying like, oh, if that happens, you should be emotionless and move on. That's a level of suppression itself. But I'm saying if you have the peace from the inside, then the way you show up is a lot more powerful on the outside.
Yeah. And something that's been kind of knocking around my mind recently, having been coached in more like holistic health and metabolic health, is that there's quite a lot of similarities between cleaning up mentally and then doing a task. Like if you let go of unproductive patterns first and then try and do a task, it's so much easier. And similarly, if you work on your metabolic health first and get that firing on all cylinders, then I found that it was much easier for me to lose weight or improve my athletic performance. And so, what you said as well, there's this analog where you initially were this loving being that, or everyone initially was this loving being with a lot of self belief, and then things got in the way that weighed us down. I think it's quite similar to how um, Christopher Walker from Thermodiet, the way he explains it is that, when you're born a baby, you're really firing on all cylinders and you're in a vibrant state of health. And that's almost what you're supposed to be like. But then as more environmental influences such as pollution or wrong nutritional choices get in the way, they slow us down. But you can still work back towards cleaning that up and firing on all cylinders. And then once you're doing that, all your goals will be a lot more effortless. And so, even though I think a lot of this sounds quite contrary to the narrative of why would I spend time cleaning up when I can just go do the thing that I want to do or need to do to achieve my goals, it's actually by taking the time away from, I guess, the external strategic technical stuff and looking inwards, you're paradoxically going to speed up your progress towards the goal.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it's good that it sounds contrary, because if you do the regular thing, you just live a regular life. And if you're happy with that, then great. But I think if you're even listening to this podcast and actually paying attention and not just playing it in the background as you try to do like four things all at once, then you do want a life that's meaningful and great. And that involves doing very contrarian things. And if anything, whenever something feels a little bit contrarian, if it's especially fits at the right level of like moral development and psychological development as well, it makes me nowadays pay more attention, because the default life is not very peaceful. And we see that every day, right? So if you want to live in peace, like spend time around teachings that cultivate peace and spend time around people that cultivate peace in you. And that's why, we built this community to help you guys come and rise to these levels that you can always reach out on Instagram and ask about data driven actualization. Because, in some way, we're not just the people we spend time with, we're also the energies we spend time with. Like even with, you joining me in this mission and being a part of this full time. Like there's no one else I would have to help me with this, just because I would need someone to like do the workload or balance everything out, because energy matters and people forget that. People don't pay attention to that and get caught up in all these games that look strategically good, again, from an analytical place, that end up in ways that are quite hurtful. And some of
Yeah.
us living the life that we want is paying attention to these energies. And from there, looking at what does this belief actually mean? Like, what does it even mean to lack self-belief? Who created the concept of belief, self-belief, and lacking something? It's all mental.
Yeah.
And again, that's somewhat good because now we can talk about it and communicate a message to you. If we couldn't do that, we would just sit here in peace and we'd just be like, all right, we all
Yeah.
find peace then. But it's also very malleable and it's something you can play with. And that's really the message here. So as you listen to this, don't just listen to the words, but feel the energy you're coming from. Like treat this podcast not as, oh, here's the intellectual information, but feel the emotion we're feeling. Feel the message we're trying to transmit, and your experience will be 10 times more powerful. And that's when you get to see, like, oh, my life can be different. I don't have to live in lack of self-belief. And that wasn't my default to begin with.
Yeah. And it's quite tiring to have to almost, if you spend too much time doing it like a hypothesis test, where you assume the hypothesis is there's zero self-belief, and then you wait on contrary evidence.
Mhm.
That's just a very time inefficient way of building self-belief as well, because then for every single thing that you want to accomplish in life, you need to search and wait to see evidence, and only then give yourself permission. And that's quite slow, versus by being aware of the beliefs and looking at your beliefs about your beliefs, you can almost short circuit that. And ironically, once you short circuit that, you'll start getting more external data and evidence, and then you can form your beliefs accordingly as well. But then, because you've examined your beliefs about your beliefs, you look at them, you look at the data. It's the usual story of our inductive bias. Our inductive bias will be positive, and so we'll look at the data through a positive lens, which will help typically create very useful and positive beliefs. Um, for example, like if days where I was playing with a lot of positivity, I could lose 1 point. And if I was playing with a lot of negativity, I'd say, oh, I lost that point. I'm 1 point closer to losing. Versus if
Mhm.
I was playing with a lot of positivity, I'd say, well, maybe in that point I made the other person run a lot more. So I've actually built up a bit more advantage later that I can capitalize on, that I'll
Right.
have a lot more energy, and I'm just turning up the intensity, and that it's playing into my long play. So really, it's almost, yeah, it's quite similar to what inductive biases we have. And we can have, by picking positive beliefs, we can have positive inductive biases to look at our experiences through. And oftentimes that serves to be very useful in accomplishing our goals while feeling a lot of peace.
Yeah. And usually when people have this craving to see the data before making a decision, like the data is a very sophisticated information tool. However, the almost addiction to the data is a belief-based system. It's not a database system. And the belief
Yeah.
is, and you can easily discover that, like, you can go, okay, if I don't have this data, it means, and then it's like, oh, I'll make the wrong decision, or oh, I don't know, I need this data because of this. And that belief, if it has a strong emotional charge around it, like if I took away the data and you're like, what did he do? Then there's a strong emotional charge around it. And we can actually investigate that belief. And then you can still use data to make decisions, but it's a lot more from a clean place.
Yeah.
Just like the way we structure the coaching, we still have tracking of data to see quantitatively, how are people doing? How are they getting better? And to allow them to see their own progress. But at the same time, we have the artistic understanding of going, yeah, maybe it's good this person's mood was a 5 today because they went out and tried to socialize and meet people. And that brought up some pressure and anxiety. And not to go, oh, don't do that again because your mood's going down.
Yeah.
Because we evolve into a high level perspective.
Yeah. And to add to that, I think it's also like that's why we didn't just find every single variable under the planet and just start integrating into that,
Hmm.
because it was again like the data tells a particular side of the story, and knowing which variables to pick to know what to focus on versus getting the entire day's heart rate, for example. It's just um, oftentimes superfluous, but often can also just lead to a hyper focus on on negative or on vanity metrics that can prove to be hurtful in the long run as well.
Yeah. And a good example of that is like usually when lots of bodybuilders get on steroids, right? Like you're already stacked, bro. You don't you don't need to take your arms from like 18 inches to like 18.25. But the metric almost becomes the god itself. Like they turn the metric
Yeah,
into a god, which is quite funny because if something was religious, they may be like, oh no, all these rules and blah blah blah. But I think for a lot of people, if they're kind of addicted to all these optimizations, like people who kind of have that like UV setup at home and or like a lab at home, or they take their own blood every single day just to see it's just like it's not a sustainable way to live. And I think
yeah,
from a social connection standpoint as well, having a little bit of positive bias is very good because people love to be around other positive people. And
yeah,
if someone's at that level and you come in and you're skeptical and you're like, prove to me why this would work, that person's going to be like, all right, go somewhere else.
yeah, exactly. Um, yeah, like I feel like we've all seen that one person who just is raining on the parade and it's just like, um, you know, pain to be around. And I think the other point you made around being sustainable, and I'm definitely guilty of this, of like, it's easy to, for example, take counting calories to such an extreme that
Hmm.
you're at like your buddy's birthday party and you're like, no cake for me because
Yeah,
you
I've
don't
been
have
there
enough
before.
macros.
Yeah. Guys, I
um,
already finished my macros. No, I don't care. It's my birthday. You eat the cake.
um, and so, yeah, I think making it sustainable is really another very important and often overlooked aspect.
Right, exactly. Um, and I think the optimization that really is the sustainability. Like I think
Yeah,
when people try to optimize for today, they're actually missing the optimization 10, 20 years from now. And that's also applied to our content strategy, which is basically have cool conversations, do a little bit of editing, upload them with some like thumbnail and some text, is because, I realized and we kind of realized like, sure, we could play the YouTube game, but then whenever we wanted to give out knowledge, it was always a little bit incomplete. And we could give out maybe like 5% of what we actually knew. Whereas with these, we can have these conversations. And maybe that's slower for this month or this year. But if we can do this consistently for 5, 10 years or 20 years, a lot easier than we would if we had to spend like 20 hours of editing on each video,
yeah,
then this is actually a lot faster. And
yeah.
that's really the power in integrating these different tools to build the life that you want.
Yeah. And it even reminds me of like my own lifting journey where one of the programs I was on was by all like standard scientific metrics, the most optimal. Like it incorporated all the findings on, I believe, like
Is this
velocity-based
the
training,
is this the one with 4 sets? The two
five
hour workout
sets.
routine? Four or five
Yeah,
sets
five
of
sets of
curl
like
action.
bicep curls and
Oh
stuff. And
yeah.
I was just like, and by all optimal standards, it was hitting like all the velocity based like findings. It was hitting all these many sets per week for optimal hypertrophy findings. And the problem was within, and I'm sure for some people that works great, and I'm not invalidating any of the scientific
Yeah,
findings
I love
that
that.
led to that.
I love
Um,
5 sets of bicep curls.
yeah. But for me personally, I was like, within 3 months, I was already so burnt out because I was like, I really don't want. I'm not going to do 5 sets of forearm curls. Like I'm happy with like my forearms being small. I'm not going to do calf raises. Like I'm just not
Yeah,
going to do that. And
yeah,
I'm willing to let my forearms look like antlers, um, just to avoid spending those 25 minutes of my life.
right.
Um, but the thing was something that was so optimal in this short period of time, it burned me out so much that I didn't go to the gym for an entire year after that.
Hmm.
And so, if we actually look over a long enough time horizon, by going too hard on the short term optimization, I actually did something that was a lot less optimal over the course
Right,
of a year. And
right.
then recently, like switching into something that's a lot more minimalistic, it's actually, yeah, maybe in 4 months, I wouldn't be at the same place where I would be if I did that, 5 sets of bicep curls, 5 sets of everything, be at the gym for 2.5 hours. But I know that because that's a thing I can stick to for 2, 3, 4, 5 years. I know that 3, 4 years down the line, I'll actually have made way more progress with something that's more minimalistic and doesn't tax me, even if I'm like behind when measurements are taken, let's say on the 4 month mark.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I think everyone's made that mistake at the gym of just going too hard. And next thing you know,
Yeah.
you just kind of want some distance from it.
Yeah, exactly. Never again am I doing lifting calves or forearms.
That's right. That's right. What would Alex Hormozy think about not doing calves?
Yeah, what's it? Do calves first, eight
Yeah,
sets.
yeah, I think he says it's his weakest body part, which is a good weak body part to have, actually.
Yeah.
Yeah, cool. If you guys enjoyed this podcast and you want to make some very optimal decisions at a 20-year time frame, please reach out to us about our community where we make transformation fun, easy, exciting, interesting for guys who are a little bit more scientifically and analytically minded by combining doing the inner healing work and then building courage in the outside world and putting some gamification in there in the process. So if you want that, reach out on Instagram at Data Driven Actualization, send a message, and we can send you guys our outline. And outside of that, any final thoughts on this topic, Mr. Namer?
Nope. I think what needs to be said from my side has been said. Any
Right.
final thoughts for you?
I think it's important to understand, like, if you commit to these practices for the next 5 years, by year 6, changing a belief can be like as simple as brushing your teeth or snapping a finger with some belief, not with everything, right? But the question is, are you willing to make that commitment? And I think that's when it comes back to what we're talking about is going slow at the beginning and just really practicing the practice allows you to get to that, what's it called? Inflection point where the results just go like boom.
Yeah.
But people see where you're at, like at least for me, where I'm at, like in my journey, right? And people go, whoa, how do you do that so fast? But it's like I put in the work.
Yeah, exactly.
And I can speak from this perspective and go, it's super easy to change your beliefs, but then don't discount the fact that you also have a build-up process through this. So
Yeah.
go do the meditation, go do the healing work, like actually listen to this podcast, take some notes, change some things in your life. And even if you're not joining the community, like if you're actually putting things to work, send me a message and I'll be like, great, here's what I recommend. Because we're really here to help you guys transform. And lots of people are going to listen to this and they'll be like, well, that was cool. Thanks. And then, yeah, that was cool.
Yeah.
It will go exactly like that, actually. They'll be like, cool, thanks. And then they'll listen to the next one. They'll listen to the next podcast and they'll go, cool, thanks.
There we
Yes.
go.
And then that's what they will be in the cycle of, which then turns into an avoidance cycle. But if you can go, cool, thanks, and let me actually implement this and see how does this work in my own life, that's how you start your transformation. So be patient, commit to the long-term process, and understand that if you're okay with seeing no results for the next 5 years, but you just do the practices, first of all, you will still see results. But then by year 6, year 7, your life will completely be different. So that would be my final thoughts on this. Cool. With that, thank you for listening. This is Ege,
This is Numer.
and this is the Data Driven Actualization Podcast. If you like this, drop a like, subscribe, any topic suggestions, drop them down below. And yeah, subscribe so we can launch Dr. Numer's meme collection. Thank you for watching.